obviously caused huge amounts of disruption, huge amounts of suffering. But alongside that, we're interested in asking, along with lots of people who've already made this point, whether the pandemic is also a chance to challenge traditional orders of power, hierarchies, and traditional ways of doing research. So in this event, we're trying to ask, could this challenge to settled ways of co-production also provoke us to imagine new ways of researching together? And we noticed really early on at the beginning of lockdown, there was an outpouring of really knowledgeable, creative, innovative responses to the questions of how to do co-production in the situation of physical distancing and lockdown. However, one of the things that started to kind of nag on our mind a little bit was that many of these methods rely on knowledge that's fairly definite and explicit and easy to convey in words. And the context of the project that we're going to go on to describe is working with families with babies and really young children in the city. And often in this kind of work, things that aren't particularly definite, easily conveyed in words, become really important. So being together in spaces, the building of relationships and trust, embodied ways of knowing and being together, and often those kinds of small tracings of small moments or connections or sensations that are often known through the body and can only ever be partially articulated in words, seems really central to both research and practice and the providing of services, particularly for families with babies and toddlers. The sorts of experiences that are rarely articulated and can be hard to explain. So our group and our project began to attend to this question of what might we need to consider then in terms of working in communities and particularly with families with young children during this time of physical distancing. So that's just to set up a few of the kind of questions that we're working around with this project. I'll pass over to Katie now. I think she's going to tell us a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of the project and what it was trying to achieve.
Okay. Oh, thanks, Abby. Yes, as Abby said, well, my role, I'm the family learning manager based at Manchester Art Gallery, which is a big sort of council-run art gallery in the centre of Manchester. And I think I don't know the exact figures, but we have like over 500,000 visitors and a really busy sort of programme where we work with schools and nurseries and children. So it's kind of this, it's always quite a busy art gallery. And since about 2017, we've been working with Abby and MMU groups, researchers, and with Sure Start partners across the city, so with outreach workers and sort of children's service providers, and with health visitors as well, and sort of looking at how the art gallery can support the delivery of public services in the city. So moving away from kind of us being somewhere, a tourist destination or somewhere you come with your children to sort of as a spectator to sort of look at art or take part of in an activity, sort of more about usership and how the gallery can be used in the city to support we call them constituents or the residents of the city. So we've kind of been working, we were developing a children's gallery, so brand new gallery space, and we've been meeting every month physically in the building before COVID, sort of planning what this new gallery space would look like, and then it was supposed to open in May, and then in March we closed. But we've continued to meet with the partners during lockdown and sort of looking at what are the possibilities, what can we do, how can we continue to support each other. I think is that enough of sort of a background, because Naomi, who's the artist, Naomi, who's going to speak in a minute, she's been working with the gallery for years and years, so we've been looking at how her practice can again support the delivery of these health and education services in the city. So I'll pass over to Naomi, perhaps give a bit of background into what the sessions when we're under normal times look like. Is that okay?
Yeah, thanks, Katie.
Okay.
Hi. So yes, I'm Naomi. I'm an artist, and I've been doing workshops at the gallery for a while, long time now. And I work for the family programme, but also the health and wellbeing programme, and a few others. And we have been, just carrying on from what Katie has said, we've been working on a project where there's a Wednesday baby clinic. Basically, today I would be there, and I would make a space for the babies and the parents and carers to spend time in an installation which is inspired by artworks in the gallery. They would be sat in this big installation. They would be interacting with all of the objects and the lights and the sound. And then there would be Leanne from the Sure Start. She's a Sure Start outreach worker. She would be signing everyone in, giving them relevant information, chatting with all the parents. Behind the installation in the same room, there would be 2 health visitors at their stations. And the babies, obviously with their grown-ups, would go when called to see the health visitor and have their checkup. It's completely different from how I've worked with the gallery before, because, as Katie mentioned, moving away from that idea of it just being a place of entertainment, place to bring your kids. I did a baby session before, and we could get kind of the same group of parents, really. But for this, because people effectively need to be there to check their baby's okay, you kind of accidentally get quite a mixed audience. And it was a really lovely thing, and I really enjoyed developing the materials for the babies, and also working with health visitors and with Sure Starts, as opposed to just being within the gallery setting. So during lockdown, we, all of us, the team that meet, talked about what we could do, and we decided we had this gallery sat with loads of materials doing nothing, and we wanted to give something tangible to babies that have been born in lockdown and their parents, because that's what the session was about. It's about something physical and something that connects people in that way. So we sort of raided the cupboards, got all of my materials out. Some things, like I used broccoli and potatoes and things, obviously we didn't post them, but a lot of the materials, then we bought some extra bits and boxed them all up, learned how to do a production line with the help of other people in the gallery. And then the Sure Start took them in person to the new parents and babies for them to explore. So it's a bit of a gift from us, I guess, and a way of connecting. And also it was a good excuse for Sure Start workers to connect with those parents face to face, like on the doorstep. I think, have I missed anything out, Abby?
No, that sounds good. Should we pass over to Ruthie to talk a little bit the research side of that?
Hi. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just going to share with you just a bit of writing about a kind of an attempt to kind of map how we got to that decision of making the boxes, and how we came to that through all the different ways of meeting and the constant changes going on around us in the pandemic. So as Katie said, we'd been meeting quite a lot regularly in the gallery, and when the gallery closed we swapped to Zoom. But in that swap our conversations changed a bit. We tried to continue the original track discussing how the new space could be used in response to families and what they would need after lockdown. And we talked quite a bit about the kind of lockdown art that was appearing in all sorts of different ways, so the kind of NHS rainbows, window trails, and all the different craft activities that families were creating themselves at home. But then as the pandemic continued, this thinking kind of trailed off into the fog. Perhaps this was because we knew that these dominant narratives of children crafting away and joining Joe Wicks and Zooming with friends were not everybody's stories. We knew there were families without scissors and glue or Wi-Fi, and perhaps also because we felt too much was unknown. We felt the frustrations of the increasingly complex restrictions and plans for kind of once this is all over became faded and far away. Perhaps we changed direction because focusing on the space while it was empty was not urgent enough. The need for urgency was balanced with the need to build something meaningful, something useful, and also something delightful. So the nature of our meetings changed to something more immediate. We met more regularly. We talked about the space and about the current experiences of the families that would usually be in it. And step by step, we made, I think it was 100 of the boxes of sensory gifts and art making materials for babies and toddlers living in the city. And though it was almost unintended, each box has become greater than the sum of its parts, and as the pandemic continues, has become significant in building relationships across the city. Delivering the boxes has become an opportunity for human contact. For some, this was a catch up on the doorstep, a chance to ask a niggling question, or a moment just to meet a new face. The moments on the doorsteps between parents, possibly babies, practitioners, the boxes, and the gallery, tune into Kathleen Stewart's work on tracing the flows of energy and intensity between people, things, and places. These moments will continue as the boxes become the focus of social distance play sessions for families to play with their own boxes, but in a shared space. And as restrictions fluctuate, more boxes are being made, and they're changing all the time. So now they're turning into bags, which can be carried along to other spaces more easily. And will likely be used in all sorts of other ways that we can't imagine yet. And they'll be moulded by the alive, the imminent, and the unpredictable forces that will occur between the boxes, the gallery, and the babies. That's kind of where we are at the moment.
Thanks so much, Ruthie. Well, I've got like a reverberation. So that's our part. Sorry that I didn't manage to get any. I don't think I managed to get any of the images up. Perhaps that can be an incitement to come and have a chat with us in the breakout group, though. We'll try and share some of the images then instead. So sorry about that technical hitch.
Thank you, Abby. So can I actually introduce Groundswell now? So we move on to our next mini talk about some really exciting projects. So I'm very happy to have Susie Sully and Matt Hump from Groundswell here today. And Groundswell is a charity based in London but working nationally and internationally to co-produce research on homelessness with people with lived experience of homelessness. And so this work is crucial to ensure that voices that are often left at the margins are actually heard. And during the pandemic, homelessness has become a central issue to public health, but also the spiraling economic crisis is putting many thousands at risk of homelessness. So it's all the more important to include the voices of people experiencing homelessness in our conversation about changing things, changing policies and services. But during social distances, obviously, it's very difficult to keep people involved and at the same time ensuring they're not exposed to further risks, both physically and emotionally. And so it'll be really interesting to hear from Susie and Matt about their recent projects during the pandemic, and I know they're going to share one short video as well, and then we can have a more in-depth conversation during the discussion group in the breakout room. So over to you, Susie. Remember to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Sonia.
Sonia, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, and we can see your screen, so feel free to, I think you're ready to share the video. we can see it. That's great, Susie. Thank you.
We can't hear you, Susie, for some reason. Oh, you're on mute again. Yeah.
Is that working now?
Yeah, that's better.
Sorry, I'm a bit of a Zoom person. Anyway, thank you so much, Sonia, for that lovely introduction. And Kate, thank you for that warm welcome. In the spirit of moving, I've decided to stand up for the occasion. So Matt and I are here to talk to you about co-production, participation and a pandemic. Okay, so a little bit about Groundswell, because I think this helps to build the context. So Groundswell, we have kind of 3 areas of work. The first one is we have a homeless health peer advocacy service. As I'm sure you all know, that homeless people often face health inequalities. So we train up people, volunteers mainly, with experience of homelessness to support people to access healthcare. And that service also provides kind of health promotion and in-reach service too. And we have the Insight and Action team, which is the team that Matt and I are part of, where we do volunteer and staff-led peer research projects. And we have a progression team. And basically, progression is really important. I see it as kind of hugging our staff and volunteers with experience of homelessness to try and support them to kind of move on with their lives. So maybe ongoing housing issues, benefit issues, kind of just building CV and help with training and stuff. So progression basically, you know, keep us all going. And the other thing that's I think important to know about Groundswell, and is something that we're particularly proud of, is that 2/3 of our staff have been homeless before. And we have participation, or we try to have participation. Is obviously an ongoing process all the time at all levels, so at governance level and also the day-to-day operations at Groundswell as well. So to click through the slides. So yeah, you know, participation still needs to happen in a pandemic, and we've tried our best to, you know, to make sure that it still happens. And kind of 3 main things that we'll be doing, and Matt's going to talk more about the COVID monitoring project we pretty much started from sort of day dot of lockdown. But the other things that we've been doing are we trained our advocates to do a call and check service with people in the homeless hotels and hostels, and they would call and see how they're doing and check on their well-being, and they would deliver food and medication and support with healthcare at that kind of critical point as well. So that's what our volunteers have been doing. And we've also been doing action updates about the pandemic, on benefits, on kind of the new lockdown rules, on healthcare, on the flu jab, etc., which our volunteers, hello, I think some of you might be here today, so it'd be great if you know, to hear from them too. And be making some podcasts as well, and volunteers have been involved in contributing towards those. So Matt is going to talk to you about the COVID monitoring project.
Hi everyone, I'm Matt. I work with Susie at Groundswell, as she just said. Yeah, basically we've just done amazing amounts of work, nearly 100 interviews with people experiencing homelessness about their experiences, you know, since the pandemic started. And those interviews have been done by people with lived experience as well, which is always important. I think it's not always vital, but it's kind of important in breaking those barriers down. Especially at the moment, you know, those times when you're talking to people over the phone and you can't get that sort of face-to-face contact. The OOR project, the On Our Radar project, which is a community journalism thing where we've got 15 reporters around the country, you know, basically, you know, feeding back audio, visual, all sorts of information in all sorts of forms. But it's basically getting unfiltered information back from the front line to policymakers as quickly as possible. The reference group meets a couple of times, well, basically once every 2 weeks. So it's a bi-weekly thing. It basically explores the inputs into an output. So I mean, we've done a podcast, there's an analysis workshop, a report about content and structure, and recommendations come out of that. So the whole process is basically about getting information from staff, volunteers and, you know, reporters in to those briefings and to policymakers as quickly as possible. And the insight of advocates and researchers to COVID planning meetings with external stakeholders, I mean, that's just about getting impact and getting the information to people that can actually change things. And it's really important that people know that their information, you know, that the data they're feeding back and the experiences they're feeding back are actually going to affect change. Can I have the next slide, please, Susie?
Of course.
Thank you. And this deals with the opportunities basically that have come up. And, you know, these are very double-edged swords, all of them really, because, I mean, basically, you know, it has thrown up a lot of opportunities, COVID. I mean, but every one of them can also be a challenge as well. I mean, the different medias, the fact that it's encouraged this creativity is quite amazing. As I think Steve's here today and he's been amazing on this project. It's just, you know, using different, formats to feed back in film, audio, text, and we're actually animating stuff at the moment. So we're getting people's reports and animating them. So it's really powerful ways of communicating. It's live and quicker. I mean, basically the fact that, you know, the people's experiences need to be fed back to policymakers quickly. And so I think this COVID thing has really put a boot up us really to just get things done quickly. And it's shown that it can be done. There's a broader reach across the country. I mean, we've got one reporter in Winchester, and I think there's a perception among people in London, like, you know, that people are only listened to in Westminster and the West End, and there's a perception in the country that people are only listened to in London. So I think we need to be reaching out to people more across the country, and we need to be seen to be doing that as well. And I think COVID has shown us that we can do that. I mean, people, there's another interesting thing actually, is the fact that, you know, people who found face-to-face contact difficult are now communicating. And I think as we move forward, that's got to be seen as an opportunity to reach those people, as long as we don't see it as just a cheap way of treating everybody. I think there's been less opportunity to train people. And again, this is a double-edged sword. We've got to be really careful, because that throws up a lot of safeguarding concerns, and those have to be kept an eye on. But basically, things have been actioned a lot quicker, and we've just, you know, got up and done stuff because we've had to. You know, there's been a shake-up of the system, and this is not just with the homelessness or with co-production, it's with the whole country and the way we work and see each other as a society. So I think, you know, there are many lessons that we've learned from this, and the fact that we need to do things differently. I mean, I think there are a lot of good things in practice anyway, and with research, I think it's really important that we see the positive things as well and do those more, rather than just ask people what the negatives are and not do those. I mean, there's an opportunity for people to contribute to something positive, and that's a really important issue, I think, with working with people who are experiencing homelessness, because quite often homelessness is seen as transactional, you know, that we're interviewing people or we're giving them a £10 incentive and that's all they're doing it for. But it really isn't true at all. I mean, people who are homeless want to be heard, they want their voices to be heard, and they find that really important, and they find it sort of almost a central thing in engaging. And, you know, I've had a lot of positives out of basically engaging people in that way. Thanks.
So I'm just going to share with you, if I can. Oops. Come on. So I'm just going to share with you one of the audio reports from Steve, and I think he might be here today as well, which I think is a really sort of moving and visceral and important kind of depiction of homelessness and mental health. So I'm just going to play a couple of minutes of Matt, would you mind muting yourself for a minute?
Yeah, no problem.
Saturday the Friday, the 14th of August. My name's Steve Walker. I just wanted to highlight something that's true to me anyway, about surrounding homelessness and mental health. So for me, being homeless is not really concerned with not having a home. There's so much more to it than that. You know, the popular conception is build more houses and everything's all right. It doesn't work like that for me, unfortunately. And I just want to share a little example. So today is my benefit day. Now, for the past 2 weeks, I've really struggled. I've had to walk to my mum's. It sounds like I'm bitching here, but this is just how it is. I have to walk to my mum's to have a meal. You know, I'm borrowing money for a bus pass and then not buying the bus pass. I always end up breaking into it for something or other. And then, so then you're constructing lies all the time, and none of it sits well with you. And it's just a general struggle, you know. So you would think that no proper meals for 2 weeks, living hand to mouth, borrowing money, scratching left, right and centre. You would think that when you get a decent amount of money, when you get paid, you would rectify all that. No, it doesn't work like that for me. For some unknown reason, The thought of going to Asda or whatever supermarket you care to not visit in this case is terrifying, as ridiculous as it sounds.
So yeah, I hope that kind of got across kind of what our On Our Radar platform working with reporters is it can do, and Steve's really powerful, beautiful sort of report about mental health and homelessness and the kind of the challenges around that is really important. So I'm just going to quickly go over some of the challenges that Matt and I feel that you know, if we're working in this kind of COVID world bring us when we're doing participatory research. So the first one is expensing and compensating people is a bit more challenging doing this online. Normally people come to our office and we would give them Matt, do you mind muting yourself again if that's all right? Sorry, there's a bus going past. So that would be a bit more of a challenge in these kind of COVID times. And obviously reaching people and reaching the people facing the biggest challenges. There's lots of sort of tech issues and digital exclusion that we'll talk more about. And of course, there's a lot of Zoom fatigue and people missing seeing people in real life, and it can be more difficult to engage people than kind of normally we go to a day centre and our volunteers would approach people and say, would you like to take part? And that kind of face-to-face, seeing somebody in the flesh, kind of be like, oh yeah, okay, I'll take part and I'll talk to you. It's a bit more challenging over the phone or online. Often we're asking people to report, but we're asking them to keep to the changing rules, which is obviously, as Matt's saying, we've got people all over the country. So it's, you know, and lockdowns have been different from place to place. So we're kind of asking people to kind of, you know, report on their own experiences or other people's experiences, but also keeps the rules, which can be a challenge. And there's a lot of issues that reporters are facing on top of what they're reporting, as you just heard. So it can be quite emotionally heavy for the reporters. And when we're not physically there, it can be hard to tell if people are okay. And obviously the reporters are reporting on their own challenges, so this can be re-traumatizing. So, you know, this is something that comes up anyway, you know, not in lockdown, but when our volunteers go to do research on homelessness, obviously, you know, stuff can come up for them. But Matt and I were talking on the other day about how this can be really cathartic for people too, and we should look at that as well. And obviously doing interviews and collecting data when volunteers don't have access to the online system can obviously be a challenge. We're working out how we can kind of do kind of more qualitative interviews and things. So over to Matt.
Thanks, Susie. Yeah, I mean, nowhere is that more apparent, that sort of double-edged sword thing, than the re-traumatizing, cathartic sort of thing with research. It's kind of like it can be either of those things. So everything's an opportunity, everything's a challenge sort of thing. Yeah, do we need to restructure our organisational model of working? I mean, I don't think from the top down at all, but I mean, and this is just my opinion, I think there's a hell of a lot of good stuff going on at the moment, and a lot more of an holistic approach. People are starting to embrace co-production and see the values of it, and also, you know, managing the sort of pitfalls of working with people with addiction and mental health issues, and there are challenges to do with that. But you know, managing those, we're learning how to do that. So I don't think it needs a total overhaul, but we always need to examine the way we work. And I think Groundswell are particularly good at that, you know, constantly looking at the way we're working and being honest in our evaluation of that work and trying to sort of move forward. But I think it's an organic process of evolution rather than a sort of tear it down and start again sort of thing. I mean, how can we support the well-being of volunteers remotely is incredibly difficult, and that's something we're learning. I mean, you know, it's this. I'm sorry about traffic in the background, by the way, but yeah, it's an incredibly difficult thing, and you've just got to be really aware of the sort of difficulties that throws up. And you know, so when I interview someone on the phone, I always check what their major service is that they're connected to and where they go, in case there are any safeguarding issues. And you know, do we have to contact anyone quickly and, you know, call their support in? So there are those sort of considerations. I mean, is research essential? There's, you know, there's talk at the moment, is volunteering right? Is research essential? But yeah, it's important to find things out that, you know, and to act on those. And how else are we going to do that if it's not through research? I think the question is more, is research essential, but it's like, how do we do it? And there's definitely right and wrong ways of doing it. And that's, I think, what we've got to examine more than anything. Thanks, Suze. Is there anything else you've got to add to that, Susie, by the way?
Oh, you're on mute, Susie.
Sorry, every time I lose Losing the PowerPoint. No, I think that's great, Matt. I'm really excited to talk to people more about what their thoughts are and things, and it helps us on kind of our journey. And I think it's always a process, and we're always learning, and we never really get there. We're always working on it. But just put some links here, but we can share the slides after about more about our COVID project, our action updates, our podcasts, and research and consultancy work that we do, and our training as well, in case anybody's interested. But we can share that. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you, Susie and Matt. That was a brilliant introduction to a number of really important themes that we can discuss a bit more in depth during the group discussion later in the breakout room. So I'll just leave it to James now to introduce the last project.
Okay, thanks, Sonia, and thanks to everyone for the discussion thus far. It's been really, really interesting. Just to give everyone an idea on process and on some outputs that will be, there's a recording of this talk. If you miss something, obviously we'll put like a wakelet together of all the Twitter interactions, and we'll release some blogs as well. But we want this to be like the beginning of an ongoing conversation, really, especially in the north and around co-production. So. I'm going to talk now and be joined by colleague Elmi Ali, and we're really going to outline an emerging dialogue with NIMOS Theatre in Hume, between myself, Elmi Ali, and the Cumber Collective. I'm going to talk, and then Elmi will follow. And then, if you like what you want to, if you like what you hear, you want to hear more, then we'll be available in this breakout room later. I'm going to read, if that's okay. What I found is by teaching online is that you're all as likely to get me talking about co-production and Afrofuturism as a 5-minute rabbit hole about the Home Alone movie and why it's central for understanding this topic. So I just, need to keep on topic, keep on task. So I'm going to, just going to read out. So the other thing to say, another caveat really, is that one of the issues with co-production, it's kind of, reconceptualized practice, but it's also made co-production in a way more difficult. It's made more challenging to start things, in my opinion. And so what we're talking about now is something of an origin myth. It's a speculative writing of a future history, which means in plain English that we haven't actually started doing the doing yet with this. So it's kind of an idea that we're talking into being. And with that, I'll start. So we're interested in reimagining co-production through the lenses and inspirations of Afrofuturism. I think it's important to say here that I'm not an expert in Afrofuturism, and this is crucial really for this engagement. But it's also unusual. Academics are definitionally experts. So why am I getting involved in? Why are you listening to someone who's not an expert? I've been involved with co-production for over a decade now, and before that participatory and that sort of thing. So I'm profoundly committed to it, and I really am a believer, but I'm also frustrated with it. And I'm going to explain why a little bit. So co-production is claimed to empower, enact equality and democracy, and contribute to social justice. And there's always this underbelly that it's messy, and as Kate Parr mentioned at the beginning, it's kind of an aspiration that we don't always meet. But I've been working with speculative, pragmatic approaches, and the idea is not to nitpick with the claims of, is co-production equality? It's more to ask, or to develop more interesting propositions, really. These propositions should work to situate us otherwise. And I think, the main thing for me is reimagining the practices of co-production through Afrofuturism is interesting, if it's anything else. It might not feel like it for those struggling with the lack of recognition of the emotional and relational labour required to develop co-produced projects within the modern university. But co-production is an institutionally sanctioned discourse, like participation, inclusion and diversity, which have, proved to be so problematic. So co-production is typically constituted from project management technologies. We have contracts, we have intellectual property rights, all of these things. Again, we're not here to nitpick, but to reorient and retell. I think it's important for co-production is to learn the lessons of the decolonizing research and methodologies and the university. This talks about, the relationship of universities to colonial and racist pasts, the relationship between academic discourses and disciplines in relation to Enlightenment values of universalism, reason and rationality, and typically Eurocentrism that's based on an opposition to an unreasonable, irrational other. There's lots of work in this area. And obviously this is the work that co-production is set out to do. But I think what is important is co-production is not this neutral thing. co-production is not this neutral set of practices that are apolitical, that don't shape and don't push us into certain ways of thinking and acting. And that's why we're interested in, not just co-producing Afrofuturism, but reimagining co-production through Afrofuturism. So it's to change that co-production. It's not about just critiquing co-production, but Afrofuturism offers a really generative focus for co-producing research. It's diverse, it's live, it's lively, people are interested in it. It's got many practices and applications. For Womack, it is both an artistic aesthetic and a framework for critical theory. Afrofuturism combines elements of science fiction, historical fiction, speculative fiction, fantasy, Afrocentricity, magic realism, and non-Western beliefs. And I think this is, really interesting for reimagining what co-production could be. As two, short examples, co-production involves citizens in planning research, collecting data, and analysing data. But making theory remains the elite preserve of academics. Afrofuturism's emancipatory politics inspires the attempt to co-produce theory with citizens, reimagining what theory is and how it connects to everyday life. Co-produce ethics emphasize equality, but Afrofuturism invites us to think of being alien and alienation rather than equality and participation, which changes how we think about ethics, changes the relationships of obligation, and the relationships these microsocial relationships of accompaniment in research. So I think there's lots of, what we found is there's lots of kind of, academic and practical ideas, but, how do we do this? How do we bring it together? So we've been kicking around two ideas, and this will be developed, with the work with Kumba and Elmi Ali and NIMOS. But, the first idea that we came up with is an Afrofuturist outpost. So the Afrofuturist outpost will be housed in the NIMOS Theatre in Hume. It's inspired by innovations like the 826 Valencia model, participatory city, Google garages, science shops. It's a project space for young people to work with mentors, socialise, sell art outputs, and volunteer to gain experience, inspiration, and co-produce research. The AI is a shop, and this is crucial to it. It's a process for telling stories and storying, but the things that are made are stock inventory, and this creates an archive for the research, the artifacts, the encounters, and the objects. It's an experimental space for evaluation. Are the things we make bought, bartered, stole, or owned collectively? And finally, the outpost is a staging point in many, sci-fi novels where characters, or in this case, people in the community, come to find things required for an adventure. So that's the first idea. And the second idea is an Afrofuturist citizen inquiry, which is open to transmedia submissions from the past, present, and future Afro diaspora. This involves imagining, telling stories, and engaging with DIY technology practices, spawning new past, presents, and futures to mobilise new emancipatory practices and imaginaries. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the kind of things that we're thinking of. You can tell we've tried to use the language to make it sound more real than it is. So if anyone found that kind of difficult to follow, like I said, there'll be a blog, but come and talk to us in the breakout room. Now, Elmi should be there, and I'll invite him to kind of take up the remaining few minutes of our talk. I think he's got 5 minutes left.
Hey,
Elmi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. So I'm just going to add a little bit on to what James has said, and I think I'm going to talk a little bit about Kumba and sort of the prospective collaboration that will happen. We've been talking about it for a while now, but haven't actually started. And I think we were all really interested in using Afrofuturism as a baseline, and thought of the university as a very important resource, but also approach the collaboration with a very healthy amount of skepticism. Solely because the idea of the reasonable, irrational other is something that we're very clear on, and our stance when faced with an institution or power. So Kumba or the NIMOS both come from the word Naya, and the word, or in Swahili, would be Nia. And the word Kumba both come from a Kwanzaa philosophy, and Kwanzaa is an African American philosophy, and there's 7 pillars, and some of the pillars include these theories like Kumba, which is the pillar of creativity, and Kuumba in Swahili means to create, and Nia means intention. So how the history of the Naya Mosque as a building and the history of Kumba as a new creation within a building with historical significance as one of the earliest working Black theatre spaces, not just in the UK, but in Europe, is quite important to us and not lost as we go forward. So the ideas of the university coming on board and assisting or opening avenues for co-production, opening avenues for joint participation, opening avenues for equal and equitable relationships are something that we were very keen on exploring, but also the members of the team have to be satisfied with the relevance and the outcomes that the university brings to the table, because it's not an easy pill to swallow for a group and organization that's trying to divest from power, not necessarily integrate with it, and to try and create things outside of the center and form new centers and work from the periphery in traditional post-colonial style. So Afrofuturism is a fantastic model that allows for these ideas to begin to be explored. So, just to do a brief run through, I think some theories that James mentioned around Afrofuturism that are quite interesting, and the theories we're exploring on the ground are ideas like, counter memory, where we reassess ideas of, history from the past, history with a capital H, and deal with recasting history with a small cap H, history of the people, not necessarily history of the institutions. History of Mossad in relation to the Pan-African Congress that happened in the university premises is something that's really important to us, because they might have had the meetings in the university, but they were lodged in the African neighborhoods in the UK. Ideas around alienation and looking at things like colonialism and transatlantic slavery, not with the negativity with which we're used to looking at them, not denying that, but also opening other possibilities and saying things like, if there is a prospective future of surviving an alien invasion, then it has happened in places like Africa and the Caribbean, where the aliens did come and people were taken and they did survive and came out the other end speaking in the alien language. So these ideas of flipping and counter memory and remixology and bricolage and Afropolitanism, and the idea of Afrofuturism having not just a global outlook but a planetary outlook. And these ideas influence on a ground level how Kumba and the Naya Mosque are set up. Our systems are open, divested, collective, syndicated. We invite more people to the table as opposed to taking away the table. So we're really keen on developing things or the citizen program, while simultaneously thinking about counter memory with the outpost. So it is simultaneously a future idea, but also something very similar to a colonial curio shop. So it simultaneously looks back and also looks into the future and tries to rewrite that. So how we move forward is open. We're really keen on ideas around collaboration. We're really keen on any ideas around research the university has to offer. So far, the so far as the project is set up, it is hospitable to what we're trying to create. And we hope to continue that equitable relationship going forward and hopefully build something that creates equal participation, that is equally welcoming to both the members and the artists that are syndicated with Kumba and NIMOS, but also to the larger community which we serve, because we find ourselves in Hume. We work with the students who are in lockdown, we work with local businesses and giving them digital literacy, and a resource space like the space we're planning on creating will be priceless in terms of creating relevant resources that will be able to propel the work that is happening both within the university in its relationship to the larger community in Hume where it finds itself, but also with us as community members in having a more equitable and more interesting relationship with the university. Because the idea that we live right next to an academic institution, but struggle to necessarily have a back and forth and to be able to exploit the resources that exist there is something that has been erected by power, something that we might and should be able to navigate and be able to make work to our advantage. And I think in Afrofuturist, typical Afrofuturist ideal, it's an African ideal. It honors the individuals and not necessarily the gates that define them. So universities and institutions are run by individuals. So it is in the Afrofuturist tradition to speak directly to the individual and to address and honor the individual, and through that create equitable relationships. So I think that's me.
Amazing, thank you, Elmi. That's incredible. So, right. So the format next is, we're a little bit behind schedule, but what I'll say is if we go into the breakout rooms, it was going to be for 30 minutes, but if we go in for 25 minutes and then come back in the main room, this one, for like a 5 or 10 minute close and next direction. So just to be clear, Laura has put in the chat, if you are interested, you get a choice now of 3 talks. So the first one is Tacit Knowledge, and there you can talk more or hear more and talk more about Abbey Hackett and Manchester Art Galleries, the project, the first one you heard. The next one is Margins, and that's Sonia Busu and Nigel and Matt and Susie, and from Groundswell, and you'll be hearing more about their kind of like homeless project in lockdown. So if you're interested in that one, follow that Teams link. You will have to leave this Teams meeting, but you at the end you come back in, and your facilitator will give you that link. Yeah, so that's it. If you're interested in hearing more about co-production Afrofuturism, stay right here, and we will be talking about that. So by the magic of co-production and assembly, please go hither and forth to your Teams meetings, please. I guess at some point we're going to have to say this is the group. So is anyone struggling to leave this? But like, we're not going to be offended or anything, but if you could just like either raise your hand or whatever else. But in a minute we'll start and assume that everyone's interested in this meeting. I mean, we should just talk. Otherwise, people will be like, "Why am I in this room? These people are rubbish." They should just get on with it. Okay, so. Elmi and I haven't really structured this out too much, but I think what I was going to do is give a bit more of the history of the project, and then Elmi can talk more about what's happening in NIMOS. And this is a thing that in a nice way hasn't happened. So we're kind of thinking it into being. And so it's a very open thing at the moment. And so I think there's a kind of a tendency when you start doing co-produced research, is that you kind of like want to plan it all and you want to figure it out, and you want to kind of like make sure, you know, on the last day I'll be wearing red socks, it'll be a good day, and then everyone will say I'm the smartest person. And I think one of the things that works with co-production is it's getting enough of an idea to get people interested to move forward, and have it incomplete and open, that other people can kind of unpick it and take it away in their own ways. So just I'll talk a little bit about the background for the project, really, and hopefully it'll kind of make sense. So I've been talking to the people at NIMOS for quite a while, and one of the things that's always interesting is Hume is this incredibly amazing place. It's got, you know, so many rich cultural, artistic achievements. You know, there's activists that have done, you know, incredible things. You know, it's got this great history. And it's a really, you know, incredible thing, you know, like, you know, the contribution of Hume has contributed to kind of like rave music and all these kind of things. You know, it's a really kind of like, it's made contributions that have been felt internationally, you know, and also had things like, you know, the Pan-African Congress. So one of the things is, you know, I was amazed, especially working in like, you know, the kind of area around, oh, hang on, we've got Joanna, have you got a question or something? Just speak out if you're...
Oh no, I just wanted to send some respect before you started into your speech, but just to say that I find it very refreshing that you pose this provocation, and very clear that we're not all equals in co-production. And I find it so annoying going to Teams meeting after Teams meeting after Zoom meeting after real meeting where it's like, we're all equal here, this is a co-produced space, and I'm like, it's not, I can't be asked to be here anymore. So I just wanted to just give you some props and just say that I'm really pleased to be here listening. Oh,
thanks. That's really kind. And I think, yeah, I think for me, I get that. I think there's this kind of like management thing, isn't there? You know, where we're all kind of like friends and we're all part of this work family. I'm getting paid a lot more than you, and I can sack you, and you won't be able to pay your bills, and you know, all this kind of stuff. But I just, you know, I think this is it. Like, you know, there is this way of thinking about co-production, and I think it's great. Like, I think the idea that you should work with a group of young people and try to be equal is good. You know, it's like, you know, you shouldn't try to be superior to them, but it obscures too much, I think, in my thing. You know, like, I work with young people, and the young people I want to work with will probably go home to a radically different kind of like home setup than I've got. We're not equal in that, and I think that's what we're trying to rethink in a way. And so, yeah, so, you know, what I think this is it, like, you know, if we're not thinking about equality, like, how do we think about things? And what I always find is the way that organizations engage communities are, you know, profoundly simplistic, insulting, you know, kind of like ideas around like urban regeneration, area-based initiatives, you know, kind of like the idea that, you know, there should be training programs and surveillance and all this sort of stuff. I think, you know, it is kind of colonial in its way. And what we're really thinking about is how we get beyond that, really. And that was the kind of the background, added to which, you know, the pandemic and the disproportionate, you know, impacts on, you know, racialized communities, you know, BLM and all this sort of stuff. So it's kind of like, you know, how do we, you know, I'm fed up of living in a society where it's just unfair in a way, you know, and I just think, like, how do we do something better? That's the kind of how have we got here? And so we were talking, there's a new school of, it's called SODA, the School of Digital Arts. So it's a £35 million investment in the future of Manchester's digital community. And the idea is, you know, we're all going to be, or our children or whatever, will be all like tech coders / artists, and that's what we need to make the world a better place. And that's what, you know, so, but there's an issue with this, like that the pipeline for, you know, these future jobs is overwhelmingly middle class, overwhelmingly white. And there's been loads of attempts to kind of like make these programs more diverse, to create the kind of future that we would want. And there's loads of reasons why we want a more diverse, culturally, artistically diverse, workforce, or what work is, but it doesn't work. And so I was talking to kind of like soda people about that. Meanwhile, I was talking to NIMOS people, and it actually came from a bit of a misunderstanding. Like Elmi did a Christmas panto called Snow White Privilege, and I thought it was an Afrofuturist kind of performance, and I don't think it was. So I just kind of like had this idea of Afrofuturism in my head, which has just come out of nowhere. I don't know why. And that was like, why don't we work with soda? Why don't we have like an Afrofuturist thing? Like, if you're asking people from, Black global majority backgrounds to come into your space, usually, these projects, they kind of like give people stipends, give people money. They give people kind of, basically these things are kind of like the university not changing. It's just kind of like, we can give you a reduction, and I've talked to young people and they're like, well, I don't need a stipend. I don't need like a studentship. I'm actually doing okay, but my friends, they could do with the money. So the way these are understood don't make sense. You know what I mean? So we need to rethink it. And that was it. It's like, what would it be? What would, if we created like this Afrofuturist space, what would that be? And it's kind of the idea of Afrofuturism. Again, I'm not an expert at all, and that's why I like the idea, is that it's grown up outside of these things. So it's kind of like the outside coming in. The kind of, we're not assimilating. We're being, we as the university, me as a white academic, we're being transformed, and that doesn't need to happen in the university. Just in the university, it can happen in the community, and that was the idea of the Outpost in a way. But gradually, it became the idea of, if we co-produce this, like, so a man with a hammer, everything's a nail. To me, everything is, needs a co-produced project. So I'm like, whatever problem I see, I say, let's work with people, let's co-produce something. But then I kept thinking, I was like, well, if we co-produce an Afrofuturist project, it's still going to be like, me as a white academic, working in a university. We're going to sign a contract. We're going to have a project. The university will tell them when they can get paid. We might give some kind of like money out, but it's not a lot of money. So we're not equals in that. We're just giving people like, young people. If I'm on a project, I'll give a young person £80 a day, which is fine. But, I'm not getting paid £80 a day. I won't tell you what the university charges me out at, but it's not £80 a day. And there are all these forms of inequality that are there. And then you think about why these things are there and how do we unpick them. And it's not about just calling them out, but creating something different. And I think that was it for me. And I'd probably just stop here and then let Elmi come in. But it's kind of like, when I go into a room, like, I've been working in co-producing participatory work for quite a while, but first in international development, then in universities and in communities. I used to work in an international development organisation, and we'd go, worked in 35 countries. We had this action research model, and every time we went into a community, from like Kampala to, Sri Lanka or, wherever, we would always do an action research process, and it would always come out that they needed our model and they wanted our model. And it was just like, that's a surprise, isn't it? And so if I go into a space, I do research on lots of different areas. I've worked in like kind of like artificial intelligence. I've done lots of things that I'm not an expert in, but I'm an expert in research, and I would say that. And I'm always going into a room and telling people how to be a researcher about their life, and I'm the expert in that. And so it's always, that's what I'm trying to unpick and unsettle and disrupt. And I think if that's backed up by the university, it's backed up by, what actual knowledge should look like, and we can kind of disrupt that. But there's always an idea that there is a proper type of knowledge, and I think this is, if I work with a group of young people saying, let's learn about this other thing, and this other thing is in opposition, not in opposition, but it's slightly kind of like a different angle, different way, a different orientation. It's not trying to get, young people to, come into the university to do degrees to increase widening participation. It's emancipatory. It's trying to create new futures beyond whatever else, and we have to follow that adventure. So I'm not sure if that makes sense, but basically this is a bit of a kind of a ramble from me. Elmi will be far more eloquent, and then we'll have a discussion. So Elmi, have you got anything you'd like to say about,
Yeah, I mean, I just like to add that majority of the ideas that sort of are theoretically understood within the academic setting with grassroots organizations that are already very far in practice. So they might not understand necessarily the theoretical scaffolding that holds everything apart, or the research implications and all those other things that academics like to scratch their head over. But they know how to make music on an electronic keyboard, and they will continue to make music on an electronic keyboard. They're experimenting with amazing sounds, with sampling, so all the ideas around Afrofuturism that we understand, ideas around fashion, ideas around creative expression, ideas around political arrangements, ideas around community collaboration are things that are already happening in the ground. So what is most attractive about the collaboration with the university is the idea of capturing some of that within a research model, the idea of being able to replicate that maybe somewhere else after it's been built and researched. But the existence of deep pockets and rich veins of creativity across the city, not just in Hume, is limitless. Manchester has kept a tradition of music, in bedrooms by young people for years. Same with fashion, same with poetry and spoken word, same with storytelling and speculative fiction, and same with political organization. So all these movements, Black Lives Matter movements, you've got ideas like Geeks for Social Change. The history of Manchester as a forward-thinking city, politically in every angle. I think those things have stayed within the city and have stayed in the grassroots level and are just being articulated in the numerous ways and in the different waves of communities that make this city their home, and will constantly, I think, continue to happen like that. So at Kumba, we're constantly welcoming and pushing our own boundaries every time. So not only working with local communities, we had a fantastic project just after first lockdown, where we recorded a lot of traditional Somali music at the Kumba studio with Somali musicians in Manchester. And these sort of popular music scene in Manchester and sort of Somali music scene in Manchester are kind of very separate. So Kumba creates a nodal point where these two things can meet, and you can have transfer of skills and knowledge and all these things. So, and they're both digitally enhanced. They're both really interesting. They happen in completely different languages and in completely different forms and in completely different musical traditions, but both have an Afrofuturist aesthetic. Somali in the fact that the 30-year civil war and the full band has been reduced to a keyboard, which they've carried around all over the world. And with musicians who make music in their bedrooms, the whole thing has been reduced to a laptop, which they play in their room. So there's similarities and complements in every single direction, and constantly in a very natural way and a very organic way, these connections are being made. And so the ideas around alienation that are created with lockdown, the ideas around alienation that are created with unequal structures, in my opinion, means that the things in the grassroots will continue to exist as they have always. But it just means for me that institutions, if they are not astute enough, then risk being outdated and risk being completely marginalized and being irrelevant. So it is about time that they come to the forefront and offer their skills, because really universities and places of learning should be that, should be universities and places of learning. And if there are things erected that mean that even the local community cannot benefit from the fact that they live within the vicinity or sometimes within the compound of a university, then it is a great loss for the institution, because the communities survive. That's what communities do. but universities will get outmoded because they're big dinosaurs and find it difficult to adapt.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'll just say something quickly about that. I think one of the things that I find interesting about universities is, like any organization, we look to reproduce ourselves. So we look to kind of like find people who want to do research. We look to people who want to kind of like be in the university, and anything that's not that is kind of confusing for us. And I think for me, that's the kind of thing, like, you know, if I'm doing research, I make everything look like research. But, you know, and who's interested in research? You know, I've been doing it quite a long time, and I'm a nerd. Not that interested in it sometimes. You know, it's not the most interesting thing. But what Elmi's talking about, young people are doing that all the time, and it's incredibly dynamic, and it's incredibly rich, and it takes, like, you know, a person thinking about the world, creating something and sharing it. And that's, for me, is a form of research. That's amazing, you know, and they're just doing that, and it's really interesting. They're mixing, they're bringing things together, you know, there is kind of like, you know, ideas at work. So I think we've got about 12 minutes before people start coming back into here. So is there anything you'd like, any questions that people have? Anything you'd like to ask us? Anything you'd like us to talk about? I know, is it Saka? Saka, have you got your screen set up at the moment? Have you resolved this? Okay, so Saka's having... Saka, this is definitely Teams, and what you should get really is, if you kind of like, if you put your cursor over the people's pictures, like the window, you should get like this little set of buttons that come up in the middle, and so if you want to mute or unmute, it's the kind of like microphone or the camera. It is, yeah, I think Laura's helping us. So okay, so we'll press on. So does anyone have any questions? Please, you know, just unmute and speak away.
Yeah, I have a question. I suppose I think it's really important when working in knowledge systems, and we are all, I guess, especially judging from the chat that's just been coming through, like we're all intensely aware of the systems, the knowledge systems in which we're operating, either as like PhD students and people working in co-production. But what the question I have, I suppose, is that how do you see it, or others in the room see it, like the research has to land somewhere. If it doesn't land in the university, where are you envisaging that the research lands? The reason I ask this is because I myself, I'm doing an applied PhD, so I've been working on co-production projects, but not led by universities, led by local governments, and so the research lands there, and the challenge that I face and that we face is translating the findings from our co-produced projects into a format that policymakers can take seriously as knowledge. Mm-hmm. So I don't have that much experience of trying to land these projects in universities. So yeah, I was just wondering then, like with the I know this is quite a speculative conversation and there's lots of unfixed sort of plans and stuff, but where does this knowledge go? Is it for the people, or is it for an institution like a university or a government?
Well, I mean, I could say some things on that, then Elmi, if you want to, like, you know, so I think one of the things that I'm interested in co-production is, you know, it's kind of like unlearning the inheritance of academia as like a society of letters, you know, shared by gentlemen or whatever. So, you know, I think we've got this thing, what academia is, and we need to unlearn it, and we need to reimagine it in different ways. And I think that's the kind of thing that I see this as being quite interesting for, is, you know, how do we stop doing it the way that we are doing it? You know, I guess what you're talking about is audiences and where it lands. Most academic research is ignored, you know, and even if it's aimed at policymakers, you know, I'm in education at ESRC, and we were called the Blob by, you know, Michael Gove, because we were talking about, you know, kids and their actual experience, and we were told to be the enemies of promise. So, you know, I think we can kind of, you know, academia is set up to do particular things, get research impact, do, you know, publications. And I think it will always do that if those are the targets it's working towards. But I think for us, it's to reimagine what that could be. And I think, yeah, it definitely is about saying what is an Afrofuturist research? And then from there, it's like, who's interested? If it's not the community, then there's no point in doing it, really, from my point of view. But it's kind of like how, you know, why do we have meetings that aren't, you know, that you know, just people talking? You know, this is the thing. It's like, why do we, like the citizen inquiry that we were thinking about doing? It was about saying, you know, you take citizen inquiry, which is usually you get a group of people together, they ask local councillors things, they get some findings, they pass them on about, like, you know, light bulbs, whatever, in the street. The idea of the Afrofuturist thing was to say, you know, let's have a citizen inquiry that's focus is Afrofuturist. So it's interested in the past, it's interested in the present, and it's interested in the future. It's interested in speculation. It's international. And like Azelmi was saying, it's got, you know, it's about fashion, it's about clothes. It's about, like, one of the things I'm kind of interested in is, like, you know, you can make sunglasses out of ground up plastic, and, you know, and it's kind of like, how do you make Afrofuturist glasses with young people that go around getting all the plastic off people in their community, so it's a nice thing, and then you've got like these technologically enhanced sunglasses that they can sell. And, you know, I mean, that's not research, but it's kind of, you know, it's something. And I think that's what I'm kind of, I don't know, I'm trying, I think it's a great question. It's something I'm just trying to figure out. But I think we have to admit, or I think the way that research happens now isn't working for so many people. So if that's the case, you know, let's move it in a different way.
I think I'm really interested in the ideas around how research serves in empowering the local communities who have necessarily no access to that, who don't necessarily take the posture of a researcher and arrive at their ends without having ever had that thought. They might be doing research, and they might be doing a lot of research, but without ever thinking of themselves within that system. So how power is divested from the university system, and there's a data theft, you know, and shit moves from the central system and into somewhere else and serves the purposes there. And if it is education and if it is research, then if it is not useful to the people with who it's supposed to serve, then it is irrelevant. So it is only useful in so much as it serves the communities in which it is based. If it is, and if it's not so different to the early anthropologists who just sat around with tribes and wrote about their mating rituals. You know what I mean? So because it doesn't serve the tribes, they already know how they do it. So how to be able to move around that and to create research that is actually useful to the people who are being researched or who are participating in the research, I think would be the important case to make. So with our collaboration, our skepticism that we approach with the collaboration is, or the skepticism that we place on the university in our collaborative process, is to make sure that how we collaborate is in service to the participants in the co-production, you know, so that both the university and Kumba and the NIAMOS can all benefit from all the resources that are in place. And I think outside of that, it becomes really difficult. Yeah, and so the end result could be papers, it could be a movie, it could be a million and one things. But so long as those things have artifacts that are useful and remain within the local communities, then it becomes a positive outcome.
Yeah, Anne, question?
Well, it wasn't actually a question. It was just something that might be a bit exciting. Not in my university life, but in a different life. I have 3 colleagues with learning disabilities. And the exciting bit is a new academic journal editor started a new feature in the journal, an in response article. So 3 people with learning disabilities have just been published in an academic journal critiquing the way that academics have researched people with learning disabilities. So I wanted to check in. It's really exciting, and because it's the first time I've seen something like that happen. But secondly, it shows the importance of nobbling editors for academic journals, because if others did that, it starts to break the wall. It doesn't get the artifacts back to the people being researched in their communities, but it does start to break the barriers. It gives us a chance to break into academia without becoming academics.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. That's amazing. Do you know what's the name of that journal? That'd be great to check out as a format.
Yeah, it's British Journal for Learning Disability.
Okay.
They're on Twitter, and the editor is an amazing woman called Mel Nind. And it's taken about 10 years for this to happen. And it was my role was to support 3 colleagues to decide which paper they wanted to critique, and then to broker a meeting between the 3 of them and the author to try to make sure that the academic author didn't get the entirety of the flack for everything that academia has ever done to damage people with learning disabilities. But it was a really, really positive meeting. So, and the article's been made open access.
Oh, that's such a great story, I think. And I think that's what we're thinking about is how do we kind of respond to these challenges? And, you know, the Afrofuturism is this kind of, you know, thing that we can just say, how do we unlearn? How do we reimagine? And how do we kind of like work, as Elmi said, in a way that, you know, serves communities, that makes it, you know, relevant and meaningful. There's a great line from someone earlier. I think it was, what was it? Relevant, meaningful, and delightful. So I think that's kind of, you know, something that I quite like, the idea of delight. So we're being joined back by the other groups. Hello, at least the Manchester Art Gallery group. I'm not sure if the homeless crowd are back yet, but we'll be, oh, there's Kate. I think what we were going to do as just kind of like, we can start this process really, is if people had observations and reflections that they would like to share, either in the chat, like, you know, questions that you think are kind of, you know, are worth sharing and worth, you know, us thinking about, and then we'll outline a few next steps for you know, what we're thinking about, because we do think, you know, there should be, you know, some representation, like a, you know, co-production network, you know, in the north. I know there's the new one at UCL recently has been launched, but you know, up the north and all that. So is there anything, I don't know, I'm a bad facilitator on the spot, so if anyone wants to put anything in the chat and we can do, I'll do a bit of comparing. Yeah, that's interesting. About, yeah, I think this is the thing, isn't it? You know, academia tends to be one thing, and it kind of like does whatever it does, and when it comes into contact with communities, whether they're kind of defined by learning disabilities or, you know, racialized communities or working class, those issues are usually the same, you know. So it's kind of great to kind of like learn across those, and that's one of the nice things about the co-production field, really, is that we are all on the same process of unlearning academia as something that isn't useful. Abby was saying they were talking a lot about being noticed. Oh yeah, is that Mark Dale? Maybe you're from the co-production centre in London. I think something we were talking about as well is the audiences, or the kind of like, where does co-production land? I think that was Joanna was talking in our group about if we are going to change co-produced research, where do we put it? Where does it go? Who's listening? Who's interested? And I think like Elmi in our group was saying that the idea is it must be for the communities, for citizens, and it must have a function and use for them in that. If someone's got their hand up, someone AC, if you'd like to just come in, that'd be great. Is that Anne Collins again? No. Collis.
Yeah, sorry about that. I forgot to take my hand down. I'm useless at Teams. I'm a Zoom person.
Okay. A legacy hand. I like it,
Maybe to ask then to take the conversation back to the theme of this, but in the time of social distancing.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously there's so many things that we could do, but maybe to circle back on that key barrier.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's something that we didn't do in the Afrofuturism conversation. It wasn't so much about physical distancing. It was an idea that, arrived, but and was kind of part of, trained in a way by problems. Starting something new is quite challenging. I mean, I know the UCL Co-Production Collective have been quite successful in developing new projects, but for most people, that was an issue. I mean, did anyone hear any? I think maybe we should turn over to the Groundswell group and the Manchester Art Gallery, because I think that was more, those two discussions are more focused on responding to the constraints of physical distancing.
Oh, yeah. Hi, James. Yeah, in the Groundswell group, we talked a little bit about that, responding to the constraints. And our group, Susie was saying about how adaptations have been made, really moving from a quantitative approach to qualitative approach to their research, talking about daily diaries. And Matt gave us some suggestions on how to make all this accessible, and like purchasing phones for peer researchers, and there are some of the points that some unique opportunities for people housed in hotels, so opportunities for new conversations in new places as well. But there are definitely COVID risks with all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Abby and the Manchester Art Gallery people, was there anything that came out of your discussion on physical distancing?
Hi, James. Yeah, heaps. Been sort of dumping various bits of thoughts into the chat, and I know other people have contributed in the chat as well. We talked a lot about how we reframe what is valued and what's important, and how we meet people's practical needs in terms of working with, we're talking particularly about working with children, young families, but also like the more than practical and the more than functional, those kinds of relational needs, and also the way in which objects or places can just shift an atmosphere or shift a feeling, and like that can be so important in that kind of space when you're with young children. And we also talked a lot about making connections and helping people to feel like they were being thought of. We talked about the notion of gifting and the notion of feeling like you were noticed, even if that was at a distance and not, you couldn't physically come into the space of that service. How do we still let people know that we're reaching out and noticing them? Yeah, and lots of people are putting other things from our group in the chat now as well.
Oh, amazing. Well, basically it was a lunchtime session, so we don't want to take up too much of everyone's day, but I'd just like to thank everyone for showing up. I'd like to thank, the people from the organisations, Manchester Art Gallery and Groundswell and Kumba and NIMOS. I think one of the things that we've been doing is having a number of these events, not as regular as maybe we'd like, but we always thought that when lockdown happened and physical distancing happened, there needed to be a community of people who could support each other in demanding that good qualitative or quantitative actually, but good critical and good co-production work was included in the process, because it's too easy to cut corners. And we know the work that we do is so important in bringing to the perspective, dialogue, and helping to change things, if only a little bit. And I think that was the kind of the intention. We kind of thought that we would be beyond lockdown, but again, we're in lockdown again. So these conversations, this necessity, this need for us to come together and have a voice, but also, just reach out and give each other a nudge to say that we need to do this work. Because you can just see the kind of the stuff that Groundswell's been doing, and Manchester Art Gallery is incredible, and it's really interesting, and it's rethinking what we do. And I think that's some of the most important things. I mean, that's what we were trying to do in the Afro Futures project, is just rethink the practice that we do, unlearn academia as not as useful, and rethink it as more useful. Use isn't always the best way, but we'd like to thank you. Like I said earlier, there will be a recording available, there will be some blogs, and these will be ongoing conversations and projects, so we'll be in touch. There's also, there's something bubbling away, and I've mentioned it a couple of times, but we'd like to kind of move towards having, and I'm not sure if everyone's in the north, but some sort of like centre or presence for co-production in the north that is, interesting and is ambitious and courageous in kind of like making sure that marginalized people are included through imagination, their tacit knowledge and something that includes the margins. But I lack the eloquence at the moment. I need caffeine. So I'd just like to thank everyone for participating. It's been great to chat to you all. We'll be in touch. Thanks. The Northern Paradise.
Thanks.
Right.
Wow, that is.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Bye. Thanks, James.
Bye. Cheers, Susie. See you.